So today we're going to jump into a pretty viral commentary that makes a really bold and, let's face it, controversial argument about a threat facing the West. What we're going to do is break down exactly how it builds its case, piece by piece, from the very beginning right up to its pretty stark conclusion. Let's get into it.
Right out of the gate, the source doesn't waste any time. It kicks everything off with this one question. And this isn't just some catchy opening, it's the entire thesis of the argument. Everything that comes next is designed to build a case that answers this single, very pointed question.
So how does it even start to build that case? Well, it kicks things off by trying to create this real sense of urgency. It does that by laying out a series of recent, violent events, arguing that these are not just isolated incidents, but they're actually part of a much larger pattern. Now, the way this information is presented is really key. It's just this rapid-fire list of attacks happening all over the Western world. And the whole point here, right, is to make you feel like this is a relentless, almost coordinated threat. The idea is to suggest these aren't just random acts, but are all connected pieces of a much, much bigger puzzle. Okay, so after establishing what it calls a pattern of violence, the source then pivots. It starts to argue that these aren't just senseless acts. Instead, it claims they're driven by a very specific and openly declared ideology. And to make that case, it uses direct quotes from religious figures. This quote is basically presented as the smoking gun. The source uses it to claim there's an openly stated goal here, to replace Western legal systems with Sharia law. It's actually pretty interesting because the speaker in the source's clip, he talks about two kinds of jihad, one of words and one of the sword, but he makes it very clear that both of them lead to the same endgame, which is removing non-Islamic governments. Right, so you've got the ideology laid out. The next step, naturally, is to try and put some numbers to it. So the source turns to statistics, specifically from a Pew Research study, to argue that these beliefs aren't just on the fringe, but are actually pretty widespread in certain parts of the world. And this is the big one. This is the headline number the source really leans on to make its point. It claims that a Pew study shows that up to 99% of people in certain Muslim-majority nations support Sharia being the official law of the land. The source then basically frames this widespread support as, a potential breeding ground for extremism. And then it zooms in a little closer on this data. You can see these figures showing really broad support for Sharia across several regions, and it contrasts that with the views of American Muslims. Now, the key point the source is really trying to hammer home here is that even in the US, while a majority believe religion should be kept separate from the law, a pretty substantial 45% think it should play a role. So this brings us to the real heart of the source's argument. It's not just about saying, hey, there's a threat. It's really digging into how the West is responding, or maybe how it's not responding. The commentary argues that the Western reaction isn't just weak, it's actually making the problem worse. And here it is, the core of that critique. The argument is that these bedrock Western values, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, are essentially being used as a shield by extremist groups. The claim is that the West's famous tolerance is being turned into a weapon against itself, creating this bizarre situation where it's actually protecting the very people who want to tear it all down. And to really back this up, the source does something pretty clever. It pulls in this clip of the UAE's Foreign Minister from 2017. Now, this is a really strategic move, because here you have a leader from a Muslim nation warning Europe about the dangers of what the source labels political correctness, which is meant to give the whole argument a lot more weight. And then, bam! Immediately after that stark warning, the source cuts to this quote from a British MP. The contrast could not be more intentional. On one side, you have this urgent warning about extremism, and on the other, you have this message of unity. The source presents this as proof of a total disconnect in how the West is even seeing the threat. All of this builds up to a key concept, a term the source actually coins itself, liberal suicidal empathy. This is their name for what they see as a self-destructive kind of compassion. This idea that Western societies, in a desperate attempt to be seen as inclusive, end up protecting ideologies that are openly hostile to them. This idea is absolutely central to their entire critique. So where does this so-called suicidal empathy even come from? Well, the source puts forward this whole historical theory. The argument is that after World War II, the West's entire moral compass just got flipped on its head. It basically became, whatever Hitler would do, we'll do the exact opposite. And the source claims this led to a rejection of things like nationalism and cultural pride, which created a vacuum that it believes is being exploited today. All right, so this is where it all comes together. We've seen the problem that's been presented, we've seen the critique of the response, and now we get to the final, really dire warning about where this is all supposedly headed if nothing changes.
Again, the source uses a quote to argue, look, this isn't some secret plan. It presents this as proof that the goals are being stated right out in the open, with a kind of confidence that the source suggests comes from a belief in the West's suicidal empathy. And it specifically highlights those words, unapologetic and uncompromising, to really drive that point home.
As it gets to the end, the argument gets, well, a lot bigger. It's not just about isolated threats anymore. Now it's about a, quote, globalist agenda that aims to erase Western culture. It frames all of this as a deliberate, orchestrated effort to weaken Western society from the inside out, even down to how kids are taught about their own history. And this is the bottom line. This is what's at stake, according to the source. The argument is that this isn't just about the fate of the West. The final claim is that if the West falls, the result won't be some kind of progressive paradise, but a global slide into pure chaos and brutality. And so after building this entire case from recent attacks all the way to historical theories, it all comes full circle, back to a question. It leaves the audience with this final challenge. It's a really provocative way to end, leaving you to think about not just the answer, but how you would even begin to have a conversation like this.